If you were born deaf but wanted the chance to hear, the best that science could offer you for decades was one of these: a cochlear implant, a piece of hardware that is surgically bolted to the side of your head that kinda sort of approximates what hearing sounds like. And look, I'm not here to trash them because for millions of people around the world, these have been genuinely life-changing. But it's still just a workaround. It's not actually fixing the problem. Kids aren't actually hearing the sweet sounds of Bluey, they're just hearing this machine's best impersonation. But on April 23rd, 2026, the FDA approved something that wasn't just a tape job. It actually restores hearing, a one-time shot right into the cochlea. A gene therapy. And it was approved in just 61 days. The fastest FDA approval in history. So today we're going to dive deep into the science of why this FDA approval was so quick, what it actually means for people who are hard of hearing, and whether it's worth the hype. What's up, nerds? Over the last few months, I've made quite a few videos complaining about how the pharmaceutical industry is too busy manufacturing GLP-1s, you know, the blockbuster weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, to focus on actual groundbreaking medical innovations. You know, like gene therapies for deafness. The science was there. The business case was there. But nobody wanted to prioritize them because of some geopolitical and administrative issues. More on that later. Meanwhile, in the background, this company Regeneron was working on a gene therapy for those who are genetically predisposed to deafness. But on April 23rd, the FDA approved that gene therapy for use by the public. Approved in just 61 days. Tied for the fastest FDA approval in history. So either something has genuinely changed about how the FDA prioritizes medical innovations, or we're about to learn that speed isn't the same as progress. The drug in question is called lunsotogene parvec. Lunsotogene. You know what? Everyone calls it by its brand name, Otarmeni. The point being that Regeneron knows how to get a drug across the FDA finish line. But Otarmeni is extra special. It's just the 6th drug that was approved using this new fast-tracking process that the FDA has, called the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher. Not only that, this is the first gene therapy to get approved with this voucher, meaning it directly modifies people's genes to fix a genetic issue, rather than just managing its symptoms. And this specific priority voucher is designed to fast-track the approval of treatments for rare diseases in patients that have literally no other options. And in theory, that's a great idea. But if you've perused this channel before, you know that I've got some thoughts, mostly negative, about this voucher. Though the intention is good, the execution is certainly not. These vouchers and approvals are based almost entirely on a single dude's opinion on whether or not he wants to approve that new therapeutic. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary. And if we're putting it nicely here, he has way more misses than he has hits. There are countless examples of him forcing the hands of other directors to approve certain things, completely go against the advice of scientific advisory committees, have massive inconsistencies between what does and what does not get approved. This man is a walking regulatory tornado, and he leads all of the regulatory. So news like this makes me cautiously optimistic at best, because time and time again, this voucher makes us ask the question, is it actually the science that got this speedy approval, or are we moving fast for the wrong reasons? Before we can know if Otarmeni is worth the hype, we have to look at the problem it's trying to solve. So real quick, here's Hearing 101. As sound waves come into your ear, they vibrate your eardrum, which moves these 3 tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, known as the ossicles, which create pressure waves in the fluid inside of your cochlea. These waves physically vibrate these stereocilia, or hair-like projections that sit on top of your inner hair cells. This forces certain ion channels in those hair cells to open up. It changes the electrical potential of those hair cells, releasing certain neurotransmitters, which stimulates the auditory nerve and shoots it into your brain. Your brain then processes that auditory signal into a sound that you recognize. Basically, a sound wave creates mechanical energy, which then creates electrical energy, which then creates. One of the most important genes to make all this happen is called the OTOF gene. It makes a protein called OTOF-related. And OTOF-related is one of those proteins that lives at the synapse of those inner hair cells. It's this molecular messenger that packs up that signal and fires down the auditory nerve. But many people have what's called biallelic OTOF mutations. Both possible copies of this gene are broken. There's no molecular messenger to adequately transduce that signal. But here's the thing, in these cases, the rest of the mechanical machinery is totally fine. All of the physiological parts of the ear are completely intact. It'd be like dropping your phone in the toilet. The battery, the SIM card, the screen, it's all together, but the electrical components are completely fried. Now, people with biallelic OTOF mutations is relatively rare, They only account for about 2 to 8% of people who have an inherited hearing loss. This might seem like an unusual choice to give a priority review voucher for something like this for a patient population this small, but this is actually the perfect case to use it. Clinical trials are very expensive, and companies don't want to spend all that time and money to develop a treatment if there's a small patient population. Fast-tracking the approval process gives more incentive for these companies to develop these treatments. And scientifically, because the cochlear structure is still intact, you don't actually need to replace anything. You're just trying to deliver the instruction manual so that your inner hair cells can make the right amount of that molecular messenger. And how exactly they do that is by far the coolest part. The delivery vehicle is something called an adeno-associated virus, or an AAV. It's basically a tiny, harmless virus that scientists have completely gutted and repurposed as a molecular FedEx truck. Yes, the word virus is scary, but they are genetically engineered to be not scary. Rather than harmful viral DNA, AAVs deliver a therapeutic gene. It docks onto your target cells, deposits that gene, and incorporates it into its own little genome known as an episome. Your own cell's machinery can then read it and start making the protein that is encoded in that DNA. In this case, it encodes for that missing or dysfunctional OTOF gene. And AAVs are quite a hot topic. They've been approved for several different diseases by the FDA. Spinal muscular atrophy, hemophilia, inherited blindness. It's a well-established platform, not some Frankenstein-looking ass. But here's the problem. Like me in grade school, the OTOF gene is annoyingly massive. It's approximately 6 kb long, or 6,000 pairs of DNA nucleotides repeated in a specific sequence. But AAVs, they're only big enough to hold 5 kb at best. So unless OTOF wants to shrink itself by over 17%, there's not an easy way to fit OTOF into a single viral vehicle. I don't care how much you pivot, it's not going to fit. And for years, this is a hard stop. No delivering OTOF. This might sound sillily simple, but Otarmeni's solution is just sending 2 trucks. They literally split the OTOF gene and put them into 2 separate AAV vectors. And this part is fascinating. Both get injected into the cochlea simultaneously. Only once they are inside the inner hair cell, these 2 halves find each other. Then they reassemble into a complete, full-length, functional OTOF gene. Now we really need to take a second to appreciate this because the precision needed to pull this off is absolutely insane. Not only does each AAV or each truck need to be administered in the right ratio, they have to be delivered at the same time to the same cell, so that a single inner hair cell doesn't get just a lot of copies of 1/2 of that gene. But also, these 2 halves of the OTOF DNA need to find each other, assemble, well before any other nonsense can happen. This is why even the FDA was so excited when they announced it, highlighting this is literally the first ever dual AAV therapy that's been FDA approved. This isn't just a regular drug approval. It is a super cool ass drug approval that serves as a proof of concept. It would allow drug developers to revisit those genes that were otherwise thought to be too big to deliver. And the delivery itself is precise and it's targeted because it's done in a single surgery directly to the cochlea. 2 AAVs, 1 injection, 1 potential cure. At least, in theory. To back that up, we have to look at the numbers from the actual clinical trials. Regeneron ran what was called the CHORD trials. I believe it was CHORD. It might be a soft C. 20 pediatric patients were enrolled, ranging from 10 months to 16 years of age. They each went under the knife and were given 1 single dose of this dual AAV. And 48 weeks later, their hearing was measured. And what they saw was 80%. 80% of patients saw a significant improvement in hearing. More specifically, they saw a 70 decibel hearing increase. If 0 decibels is no hearing, 30 decibels is hearing a whisper from a few feet away, but 70 decibels is like a vacuum cleaner in the same room. But the most incredible results are the anecdotal ones from the parents of some of these patients. For example, one claimed that their 10-month-old started noticing changes just within a few weeks, reacting to hand claps and becoming more aware of speech and whispers. They can now more easily communicate with their loved ones. Now, if there's still haters after hearing all that, thinking, oh, it's only 80%, where'd the other 20% go? Before this, it was 0%, and the side effects were essentially 0. The only thing they reported were a few cases of middle ear infection, nausea, dizziness, and some procedural pain. Those were pretty much just surgical risks. That's not anything to do with the actual gene therapy itself. Now, I've seen some minor complaints around the study design, specifically the fact that it was a single-arm trial, meaning that everyone got the treatment. For most clinical trials, this is bad news bears because you always want to compare to some standard of care. Since there is neither a natural way to recover, nor is there an existing treatment to compare against, the control group in this study is inherently being deaf. Now, like all new treatments in pharma, nothing is perfect. You must have functioning hair cells in your cochlea and can't have already had a cochlear implant. So of that 2 to 8% of people with inherited hearing loss, a much smaller subsection is going to be able to actually get this treatment. Another thing that we touched on earlier is that this does involve surgery, which carries a significant amount of risk. Not only do children not want to go through surgery, but parents don't want to see their kids go through surgery. You could certainly argue that it's worth it, but it's not the most exciting option compared to something like a pill or even just a little injection. Next, there's the price. Regeneron hasn't explicitly said how much this will cost, but based on other FDA-approved treatments, we can assume it's a lot. The range is still between $1 and $3.5 million per patient. That is great. That is crazy. And this next one is a long-standing argument within the hearing loss community. For many, being deaf is a part of their culture. That's part of their identity. They don't see it as something that needs to be fixed. But for me, by far, the number one biggest issue is that we still cannot trust the FDA. You know those political and administrative issues I mentioned earlier? Those were created by the FDA.
Previously on Dragon Ball Z.
There are countless examples of him forcing the hands of other directors to approve certain things, completely go against the advice of scientific advisory committees, have massive inconsistencies between what does and what does not get approved.
When the approval is fast-tracked and in the hands of an absolute dingus, did they approve it because the data looked that good, or did Marty McCarty just want to pat himself on the back? Now, my past opinions on this voucher system aside, I actually think this is the perfect case to use this framework. We should be reducing barriers for novel, innovative treatments. And the clinical data, from what I can tell, looks fantastic. Now, I'm also a little bit blinded by how friggin' cool this dual AAV system is. My PhD was in delivery vehicles after all, so this really tickles my pickle. But I definitely don't want to get too excited until we've seen a little bit more. For example, just a few months ago, I made a video about how a novel AAV technology was used to potentially cure Huntington's disease. They followed all of the necessary recommendations that the FDA made, and it still got rejected because dingus. You can also let me know what you think about accelerated approval processes in the comments down below. Is this something you can trust? Are you also a little wary? What are you wary about? That's all for me today. Thank you all for stopping by, and you stay classy, nerds.